With today's science lesson, we're going to be doing an experiment and going over objects that sink and objects that float. So we'll call this experiment Will it sink or will it float? Now, in order for us to know which ones sink and which ones float, we have to know the definition of the word sink and the definition of the word float. So we'll talk about sink first. Sink, we'll look at two definitions. The first one means to descend or to drop. The second definition of sink is to go down below the surface of something. Especially a liquid, which is what we're going to be using to test our objects, hence the bowl of water. And it also means to become submerged. Because when an object sinks under the water, it becomes submerged underneath it. And the definition of float is to rest or move on or near the surface of a liquid. So sink is to descend or to drop, or to go down below the surface of something, especially a liquid such as water, and become submerged. To float means to rest or move on or near the surface of a liquid, and I forgot, of a liquid without sinking.
I can float.
You can float in water? So without sinking. Now before I move on to the experiment, I'm just going to read a short blurb. So an object's density and the amount of water it can displace determines whether it will sink or float. Density refers to the measure of the relative heaviness of an object based on its volume or dimensions. For example, a styrofoam cup is less dense than a ceramic cup of the same size. In the ceramic cup, molecules are packed much tighter together than in a styrofoam cup, giving it a higher density, which means it'll sink in liquids. The molecules are spread out in the styrofoam cup, which will make it float. Liquids also have density, and in order to float, an object must be less dense than the liquid it floats in. Objects will sink more slowly depending on the thickness of liquid. So if we were to test right now a styrofoam cup and a ceramic cup, the styrofoam cup would obviously float, and the ceramic cup would sink. So we'll just move these two definitions over. So we have them during our experiment. And then we're going to look at the sheet that I handed out to everyone called Will It Sink or Will It Float? There's a column for the objects, a column that says sink, and a column that says float. So in the objects we have a cork, a pencil, a paperclip, aluminum foil, plastic spoon, a crayon, a cotton ball, a rubber band, and a scissor. So we're going to do an observation first, and you're going to write whether you think these objects will either sink or float, and I'm going to make a chart up on the board. So go ahead and do that while I'm filling out our class chart so we can all see it. Okay. Everybody should be done with their predictions of whether they think the objects will sink or float. So now we're going to actually test all the objects that are on the list. So first we're going to start off with the cork. Do we think the cork's going to sink or is it going to float?
Sink.
Okay, let's see. You guys think the cork's going to sink? It's actually going to float. So if we think back to the example with the styrofoam cup, the cork is like a styrofoam cup. The particles are spaced out more. So the second object we have on the list is a pencil. So do we think the pencil is going to sink or is it going to float?
Sink.
Sink. Let's see. The pencil is going to float. So that also like the cork. Okay. The next object we have is the paper clip. Is the paper clip going to sink or is it going to float?
Sink.
Sink. You're right. It's going to sink. So there's our first object that sinks. Okay. The next object we have is aluminum foil. So we rolled it up into a little ball. Do we think it's going to sink or is it going to float?
Float.
Float. You're right. It floats. Okay. The next object we have on the list is a plastic spoon. Is it going to sink or is it going to float?
Float.
Float. Let's see. You're right. This
Float,
one
float.
floats.
Float, float.
Okay. The next object we have is a crayon. Now the pencil floated, so do we think the crayon might sink or will it float?
Float. I'm changing my answer. Float.
Okay. Float. Let's see. You're right.
Float.
It does float. So the pencil is just like the crayon, and they both float.
Float.
Okay. The next one we have is a cotton ball. Do we think that this is going to sink or is it going to float? Any guesses? Yep.
Float.
Float. Let's see. The cotton ball is going to float. How many of you thought it was going to sink?
Me.
So the
Me.
cotton ball floats. Okay. Now we have the rubber band. Sink or float?
Sink.
Sink. It does sink.
Sink. Sink.
So the rubber band sinks. Okay. And the last one we have is scissors. Do we think the scissors are going to sink or are they going to float?
Definitely sink. It's heavy.
Sink. And you're
Heavy.
right. They sink. So most of the objects float. Let's count up how many we have. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
5, 6.
We have 6 objects that float. And then for the sink objects, we have 1, 2, 3.
3. Not many sink.
So we had more objects that floated.
Many sink.
Good job, guys. So we'll just go over the definitions one more time. And then I'll let you know what your homework assignment is. So we'll start with sink again. Sink means to descend or to drop, to go down below the surface of something, especially a liquid, and become submerged. So we have the scissors in here right now, which sunk. So they went down below the surface of the water and they're submerged underneath it because they're on the bottom. And float is to rest or move on or near the surface of a liquid without sinking. So if we put the cotton ball back on, it's resting on top, it moves around, but it's not sinking like the scissor is. So then your assignment for homework is to go home, look for objects in your house, grab a bowl of water like this. I'm going to give you another chart with the objects that are blank, and you're going to write in the objects that you found in your house, and then you're going to write whether you thought they were going to sink or float, and then I'm going to give you a column over here that says what happened, and you're going to write if it actually sank or if it sunk, or if it floated, excuse me. And then when we come back tomorrow, we'll discuss with the class some of the objects that you found that we didn't have in the class, and we'll go over it and see what everybody came up with.
Okay.